There is a phenomena you may have heard of when you were there. It's called the blue light phenomena or ghost light phenomena. It has been observed by numerous persons, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's been photographed, in which visitors to Nan Madol occasionally, not that often, but from time to time, see a light dancing amongst the ruins. Usually it's blue, sometimes it's white. And that persons supposedly who hang around too long have sometimes been struck by this light and killed. What this light is the remnant effect of what Nan Madol used to be. It used to be an electromagnetic center. It would interact with the forces of a typhoon, as I said, to degauss it, to short it out, literally short it out. An enormous electrical bolt would have been observed in the ancient past rising between Nan Madol and the formation of a typhoon. Now, even though that place is in ruins today, that basalt is still there mostly. It's collapsing. It's being destroyed by the jungle, unfortunately. But that's electrical properties are still in existence there. And if you look at the Pacific as a whole, if you look at it from space, and you were to see these various islands like Nan Madol and Tahiti and Hawaii, these are well-known islands, you would see on many of these islands the remains of enormous megalithic structures, huge structures, walls, obelisks, stone gates, the latte stones that you mentioned, these very bizarre mushroom-shaped stones. And they all belong to this former culture. These are the ruins of Lemuria that are spread across the Pacific. And the native peoples, they either have no clue where these came from, they make no claim to have built them themselves, or else they have traditions of magicians or sorcerers who came across the sea and through their great magic, or what we would call technology, were responsible for building these structures. So Lemuria still exists in a ruinous state on many of these islands. As I said, the Lemurians, the best way to understand Lemuria is as a people, as a culture spread over the Pacific, and they bequeathed themselves to these other peoples and intermarried with them and helped to form their rich cultures.
And even this great flood, this big tsunami, it is mentioned in religious texts all across the planet.
There is in Hawaii something called the Kumulipu. Interesting, the name Mu involved in that, Kumulipu. The Kumulipu is a very long recitation that initiates still give. It is a recitation of the genealogy of all of the Hawaiian kings. And the first time that it was presented to a foreigner was Captain Cook back in the 18th century. And the Kumulipu, which has been translated, and you can get a copy from the interlibrary loan, enshrined in the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, talks about the origin of the kings. How at one time, before the beginning of their history, what they describe as a warrior wave swept across the sea and destroyed a former high kingdom, and that most of the people on this kingdom perished, but a few survived, and they formed the kernel of the royal houses of the Hawaiian Islands. That's in the Kumulipu. That is by no means the only tradition of a tsunami, a huge wave that surged across the Pacific. You see the same story at Easter Island, strangely enough. You see it amongst the Tahitians. All the way up through the Aleutian Islands, there are these native traditions of this former, high, beautiful kingdom. Even as far as Thailand, when I visited Thailand and went to Bangkok specifically to see the Lac Muang, and there's the name again, Mu. They refer to it as the Lac Muang. The Lac Muang is the very absolute center of Bangkok. This beautiful little shrine, and in this shrine is the Lac Muang. It is a golden pillar. Actually, it's a stone pillar that is covered entirely with gold leaf. It's highly venerated. It is the sacred center of Bangkok and Thailand. And the reason why is because this stone pillar, the original stone pillar, was brought from the temple of Lemuria by survivors of that catastrophe and brought to Thailand to recreate life, civilized life in Thailand. That original pillar was lost with the fall of Ayutthaya, the original capital of Thailand, and the Lac Muang today is a faithful reproduction of the pillar that was brought by the survivors of Lemuria. So it's an amazing story that you see. These are rooted deeply in the traditions of native peoples everywhere. And just to collect them is like picking up pieces to this puzzle that begins to form in the mind when you finally realize that this great society, a gentle society, was a non-militaristic society, had no armies, had no navies. It did appear to have a kind of a coast guard. Beyond that, there are traditions of that. But these were a completely non-militaristic people. They had no indefinite idea of progress as we do. Their civilization did not go through cycles of greatness, decline, death, and renewal. It was consistent without being static. It's a remarkable civilization. You know, in the history of so many peoples, they talk about a former golden age. I believe Lemuria represented that golden age, one of the golden ages that human beings did go through. And it's just a remarkable story that seems to still resonate in the consciousness of people.
And even more so coming out of it, I know several people that I know in my life are going towards that Buddhist path. And when you speak of that non-militaristic, peaceful society, it brings to mind the Buddhists. And you've mentioned that Lemuria was a spiritual legacy that led to Tibetan Buddhism. Isn't that where Churchward met a rishi in India? So India, these ancient civilizations as we know them today of Tibetan Buddhism and in India and even Hindu, they spoke of Lemuria.
That is absolutely correct. James Churchward was a colonel in the British Army in the 1870s, and he had no particular interest in ancient history. He was enlisted by the British Army to assist in a flood relief that was taking place at that time. He did a very good job of it, and by that time he had taken an interest in local Indian history, that's about all. And in thanks for his work, an Indian rishi, which is a kind of a teacher, a holy teacher, said, well, Colonel, I'd like to express my gratitude to you for helping save so many of my people in this flood relief. I'll show you some secret records in our monastery that are not shown to outsiders, but we think that you should see them. We have to give you something, and we have nothing to give except our own heritage. And so these tablets were translated for Colonel Churchward. And the reason why these tablets were selected to him is because he had saved this section of India, Brahmaputra, from major flooding. And so they said, well, we know of another flood, a more terrible flood, and it is enshrined in our records, and they share this information with him. And he was so fascinated that for about 3 or 5 years, now that's all he did, is he focused entirely on the translation of these records, and that formed the basis for his series of books about the lost civilization of Mu. And you mentioned the Tibetan Buddhists. That's absolutely correct. Every people have a kind of a national ethic. The American dream, for example. And the Tibetans, they have a completely different dream. Their dream is not money or material success. Their dream is liberation from samsara, which is the cycles of reincarnation. So they try to live lives of holiness. That, I find, is very similar to the Lemurians. Everything I've learned about them, they appear to be the closest I can associate them with are today's Tibetan Buddhists, except there's an emphasis with them on the real arts of civilization, on progress in the sense of the healing arts of civilization, not the killing arts of civilization. They would have not been impressed with our atomic bomb or our capacity to murder millions of our fellow human beings. But they would have been impressed and would have understood things like our stem cell research. That they would have appreciated. These were people who were involved in the civilized arts and not in the arts of mass murder, which they would have considered the savage arts. They would not have really considered much of a difference between a blowgun and an atomic bomb. They would have despised both of them. And as a consequence, the Lemurians had an extremely long tenure in this life. Their civilization goes back. I've only just recently learned this in my other work I'm doing on another project, that the Lemurian civilization goes back to about 75,000 years ago. That is astounding. I never thought I'd make a statement like that, but I feel very confident that that civilization goes back 75 to 80,000 years ago. And I was not able to answer that question in my book, The Lost Civilization of Lemuria. People asked me, how old is Lemuria? And I said, I had no idea at the time. I knew it was old, but this civilization began to coalesce when modern human beings began to form, began to evolve. That's how old this civilization was.
Okay, so Frank, how can people get access to your books?
Well, it's called The Lost Civilization of Lemuria, and they can do it by dialing a toll-free telephone number 24 hours a day. It's 1-877-494-0044, and they take all kinds of credit card orders at that. Or they can order it directly from me. The fellow that takes care of that for me, his name is Wayne. And his email address is Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E, at ancientamerican.com.
Are you given any information from the people who've written in? I have read in some Hindu books on the island of Kauai is a Hindu temple, and the Swami, he wrote a book that said we stepped down as a vibration. We come from the sun, and we step down in density. And at first we were given, the first beings coming down into the lower densities were given ambrosia and fruit and flowers for sustaining and building this carbon body. Are you given any information about the origin of humans on Lemuria?
Yes, not quite as beautiful as that. My take is far more, I guess, down to earth, but not necessarily more correct than that. It doesn't take the spiritual aspect into consideration to that degree. The reason why I said that I believe that Lemuria began 75 to 80,000 years ago, it's an unthinkable long time ago, was because of a historic event that took place in Indonesia, and that is the eruption of a volcano called Mount Toba. Mount Toba is the greatest volcanic eruption that has ever taken place in human history. One of the largest volcanic eruptions in the Earth's history. It was absolutely beyond our scope to understand. It makes Mount St. Helens look like a hiccup by comparison. And when Mount Toba exploded, it totally altered the climate of the Earth. The entire earthly climate was drastically affected. Human beings at that time, we now know this through DNA, human beings at that time numbered about 2 million on the Earth. Now, when I say human beings, I'm not talking about entirely modern human beings. At that time, we had variations of Homo erectus. They were human, to be sure, but they looked rather different than ourselves, and they were not fully developed modern human beings. And there were about 2 million on the Earth at that time when Mount Toba exploded. When Mount Toba got done, human population had been reduced to 2,000 adults. 2,000.
Wow.
That means that we came within a hair's breadth of extinction. Out of those 2,000, this is now understood through the DNA examination of the human genome. It's known, it's accepted. There's still some debate about it, but the general scientific consensus now is, yes, that there were about 2,000, no more than 5,000 out of 2 million.
Yeah.
But that was the greatest thing that ever happened to us.